Hey there, Jeremy here. In today's demonstration, I'll be going over pattern overlays, which is a form of texture mapping. Texture mapping is a graphic design process in which a two-dimensional surface, called a texture map, is wrapped around a three-dimensional object. Consider texture mapping the electronic equivalent to applying wallpaper, paint, or veneer to a real object. On the left, I have two images I sourced from the internet. On the right are two artworks that I created that are currently in repeat and color reduced. Criteria to finding the right image to texture map your artwork onto is first you'll need to find high resolution imagery. You'll also want to select an image that will highlight your textile design, where the object is the focal point of the image. Try not to find images that will distract from your artwork by the surrounding objects or that the object you're trying to texture map is too small. Select an object that doesn't have too many construction lines, or that might include ruffles, or already has an existing pattern on the surface of the object. If you reference an image found online, it's important to change the resolution from 72 dpi to 300 dpi. I'm going to change the resolution of my two images that I sourced from the internet. I'm going to change that by going to Image, Image Size. I'm going to change the height and width. And also I'm going to change the resolution from 72 to 300. Where it says Resample, I'm going to make sure that's set to either Bicubic Sharper for reduction or Smoother for enlargement. I'm going to do that to my second image. Image, Image Size. I'll change the size of the image and the resolution to 300. Resample is set to Bicubic Sharper for reduction. Also make sure that your image is set to RGB. Most of the artworks I've created have been indexed or are an RGB file. So it's crucial that you're setting up the same color mode between all of your files. Also, do not select an image where the color of the object is black or at a very dark value. It's nearly impossible to change the color from black to, let's say, a bright yellow. The images I have a heathered gray long sleeve shirt and a pink dress. The first step would be to make selections around the garment, specifically around the construction lines of the garment, where each piece is sewn together. For example, I'll be making selections around individual components of this gray shirt. I will make one selection for each sleeve, one for the left panel, one for the right panel, one for the pocket, and the last selection will be from the collar. I might even change the color of the pants, which will go on its own selection. I'll approach the construction lines of the dress the same way by making selections around the seams of where everything is sewn together. In the front panel, there's a seam that runs along the waistline. I might remove it by using the spot healing brush. The selection tools that we'll be using today will include the lasso tool, polygonal tool, magnetic lasso tool, the magic wand tool, the quick selection, or the object selection tool. A lot of times I will make a selection around the entire outside of the garment, the silhouette first, as a rough draft, and then go back in with a lasso tool to detail out corners, nooks, and crannies that I didn't pick up on the first time around. I might use the object selection tool as a means to begin my first initial selection. The computer is making decisions for us based on the color and contrast between the foreground and the figure of which I'm trying to make selections. I have my first rough draft selection, and then I'll go back in using the lasso tool. If I hold the Shift key, it allows me to add to the selection. If I hold the Option key, it allows me to subtract from a selection. In this case, I'm going to try to add to my selection by holding Shift and getting all the details of the garment into the one selection. To pan through my artwork as I'm zoomed in, I'm holding the Spacebar, which allows me to scroll through when I'm zoomed in really close. I'm going to save this selection as my overall silhouette for the garment by going to Select, Save Selection. I'm going to save this one as Silhouette. In the Channels window, you can see that I've saved my selection. I'm going to deselect from my artwork where there's no selection. To bring my selection up again or make it active, I'm going to hold Command and click on the thumbnail that's between where the eye is and the name of that channel. This allows me to bring that selection back up. A lot of times I'll use these selections to work backward or through a subtractive process. This time around I might subtract from the overall selection. That way I can segment out the pieces individually. I'll have a left sleeve, front left panel, front right panel, a pocket, and then a right sleeve and a collar. Each one of those will have its own channel that make up the pieces of this garment. So starting with the overall silhouette, I'm going to use the lasso to deselect areas from my selection. And I'll be doing that around where the seams are in the garment. And once again, I'm holding the Option key to subtract from the selection. Now I have a left sleeve that I'm going to save as a selection. Select, Save Selection. I'm going to pull up the overall silhouette again, so I'll deselect from my selections. This time around, I'm going to pull up my silhouette by holding the Command key and clicking on the thumbnail of that selection. I'm also going to deselect from the left sleeve, so I'll hold Command plus Option, which will deselect my selection here. This time around, I'm going to subtract out the entire right side of the garment and the collar. I'm going to save this selection by going to Select, Save Selection. I'm going to walk through the same process as before, where I'll deselect everything. I'm holding Command on the silhouette channel to pull that up as a selection. Now I'm going to hold Command and Option to deselect from the left sleeve and the left front panel. This time around, I'm going to deselect the collar, the pocket, and the right sleeve. And I'll remove the right sleeve. And I'm doing that right where the seam is, where the arm is connected to the garment. I'm going to save that selection by going to Select, Save Selection. I'm going to do the same thing before, where I'll deselect everything by hitting Command D. I will hold Command and click on the silhouette of the entire form. And then to deselect through a subtractive process, I'm going to hold Command and Option and click on the left sleeve, the left front, and the right front. This time around, I'm going to delete the pocket and the collar by holding Option as I circle around those individual pieces. I'm going to go to Select, Save Selection. I'm going to do the same thing where I'll deselect everything, hold Command to activate the silhouette as a selection. Now I'm going to hold Command and Option and deselect the left sleeve, the left front, the front right, and the right sleeve. Now I'm going to deselect the collar. And I'm going to save that selection as For the grand finale of this process, I'm going to deselect everything, hitting Command D. I'm going to hold Command and click on the silhouette. I'm going to hold Command and Option to deselect the left sleeve, the left front, the front right, and the right sleeve, and the pocket. And what I should have left over is just the collar. And I'm going to save that by going to Select, Save Selection. With the images that we'll be using to texture map our patterns onto, we have to remove out any of the hue in the image. I'm first going to make a selection of the silhouette channel by holding Command and clicking on the thumbnail. I'm going to remove out any color in the artwork by going to Image, Adjustments, Desaturate, which is going to take out any of the hue in the image. And then to beef up the levels and make it much lighter so I can overlay my artwork, I'll go to Image, Adjustments, Levels. This will allow me to bring kind of a true white into the image. We almost want it so the white impedes on the texture of the image, but not so much that it completely disappears. My artwork will combine with that textural heather of the shirt. Now for the exciting part. I first want to define my pattern by going to Edit, Define Pattern. And I'll do that to my second one also. Edit, Define Pattern. In the image that I'll be texture mapping, I'm going to pull up each component separately. I'll pull up the left sleeve first as a selection by holding Command and clicking on the thumbnail of my left sleeve. And then I'll go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Pattern. I'm going to select my most recent selection of the artwork. And I'll just leave it there for right now. I can always come back later and adjust the blend mode, the scale, and the angle of my artwork as it relates to this garment. I'm going to go through each one of these first. I'm going to pull up the left front panel by holding Command and clicking on that thumbnail. And I'll go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Pattern. So it would appear like it's cut and sewn, where the pattern doesn't necessarily connect over the seam of the garment. I'll pull up the next panel, which will be the front right. I'm holding Command, clicking on the front right panel. I'll go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Pattern. Then I'll pull up the right sleeve. I'll hold Command, click on that thumbnail, and go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Pattern. I'll do that for the front pocket. Hold Command, click on the thumbnail, and go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Solid Color. This time around, I'll pick a solid color, maybe from my artwork. You can see I can eyedrop the pattern fills that I have there. And then I'll deal with the collar by clicking on Command, click on the thumbnail, and go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Solid Color. You can see on my Layer menu, I have a combination of whatever pattern or color I have selected, in addition to the mask that is saved onto the channels. So there's a link between these two. I can change these individually or all together regarding the blend mode. I'm going to select my layers at the same time by selecting the first layer and holding Shift for the other layers. I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to multiply. And you can see how it blends with that heathered texture that's in the shirt. If I want to play with the scale of these artworks, I could double click on the thumbnail of that pattern. And that thumbnail is between the eye and the mask in the layer window. So if I double click on it, I can adjust the scale. Maybe it needs to be bigger or smaller. And if I wanted to really change the angle, which this particular artwork doesn't really matter so much with because it's an all-over design, I can shift the orientation of where that pattern is directed. I'm going to do that for all of the artworks that are here. And if I needed to change the color of the collar or the pocket, I'll double click on the color swatch in the layers window. Maybe even eyedrop from another artwork. If I want to change the color of the pants, I'm going to make a selection of the pants, save it into my channels. I'll pull that up as a selection, and then I'll change the color or put an overlay on top of that area. This time around, I'm going to use the magnetic wand. This will allow me to make a selection of my image that snaps directly to the contrast in the artwork. And then when it gets into this area, I'm going to use those selections to deselect from the artwork. And then I'll use my lasso tool as my finishing tool to make sure the selection is as accurate as possible. So there's my selection. You can see that I've gone over top of the other elements of the shirt. But keep in mind, we can always hold Command and Option and deselect from that selection to make sure it's cut right next to the edge of my overlays. And I'll just click on the entire shirt silhouette. Now that I'm on the pants, I'm going to remove out the color by going to Image Adjustments, Desaturate. I'll go to Image Adjustments Levels. I'll add more white to the image. I'll go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Solid Color, and I'll change the color of those pants to something much more neutral. And on that particular layer, I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to multiply. Notice on the inside of the hand, I did not deselect those areas. I'm going to turn off that particular layer and turn on that channel where the pants are on. Any of the areas on the channel itself that show up as as red in this case, that needs to be red all the way up to the edge of where the pants are. I'm just going to redraw on that channel that I'm working with. Now that the channel has been edited to remove out the overhang of color, I'm going to turn that channel off and turn on my artwork again. Then I'll change it from normal to multiply. Working with pattern fills and color fills make it really easy to swap out new patterns and new colors. They're really quick to change once everything is set and established. I'm going to walk through the same process of making selections with this new image. I'm going to first select the entire garment using the Object Selection tool. That'll get me the entire silhouette of where I want to start my selections. As I zoom in, I'll use my lasso tool to perfect some of the selections of this image. I'm going to save the silhouette of this garment by going to Select, Save Selection. Once again, this selection gets saved in the channels area. I'm going to rename this by right-clicking on top of the title of the channel. And then I'll start the subtractive process that I did in previous selections. I'm going to deselect the left side of the garment as it follows the seam of the arm. I'm going to save this by going to Select, Save Selection. I'll do the same thing as I did in the previous image. I'm going to deselect by hitting Command D. I'm going to hold Command and click on the silhouette to bring it up as a selection. And then I'm going to hold Command and Option to deselect the left sleeve. This time around, I'm going to deselect everything but the right sleeve. And I'll go to Select, Save Selection. I'm going to do this again and maybe split apart this left panel that runs up the garment. I'm going to do the same thing as before. Deselect, Command D, Command over top of the silhouette channel, and Command Option to deselect from the left and right sleeve. Now I'm left with a sleeveless garment. I'm going to deselect around the left panel that connects to the front panel. And I'm going to save that by going to Select, Save Selection. I'll do the same thing as before. Deselect everything, Command D, hold Command and click on the silhouette of the form, hold Command and Option to deselect the left sleeve, the right sleeve, and the front panel. And what I'm left with is that left insert that's connected to the front panel. And I'm going to save that by going to Select, Save Selection. Before I map into this space, I'm going to modify some of the construction lines here. I might use the spot healing brush to eliminate the seam that's in the front, as I think it's going to become distracting to the artwork that I'm going to map onto this garment. I'm also going to blend out some of the other construction lines that's happening on the left panel. And I'll do that to the right panel, even though we don't really see much of it. I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the first image by making sure that the silhouette selection is active, and I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, Desaturate, remove out the color, and then I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, and Levels to make the whites whiter and to make the shadows a lot more evident. I'm going to pull up each panel of my selections and make a new fill layer of it so that it combines my artwork with the construction panels of this garment. I'm going to first select the front panel by holding on Command and clicking on Front Panel. I'm going to make a new fill layer by going to Layer, New Fill Layer, Pattern. This artwork, I can already tell, is much larger than it needs to be. I'm going to take it down to something smaller and more manageable. I'm going to pull up the left sleeve and maybe even the right sleeve together by holding Command on the left sleeve and then Command and Shift on the right sleeve. I can combine both of these because there's a panel that breaks them up in between. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Pattern. And then for the left side, I'm going to select the left panel as its own selection. And I'll go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Pattern. I'm going to change the 3 layers that I have from normal to multiply. And that should combine the shadowing of the dress underneath of my pattern. If it doesn't quite feel like there's enough shadow coming through, you might be able to change the image underneath your layers above. And to do that, I'm going to pull up the silhouette of the garment. I'm going to go to my background layer that the original image is on, and then go to Image, Adjustments, Levels. This will allow me to increase the shadows behind my pattern overlay. And that concludes this demo of pattern overlays or texture mapping of your print and pattern artwork over top of a fashion image.